Good morning. My name's Phil Asgian, a member of our social justice ministry team. And as you know, we build the forums around a common theme. This year, our theme has been diving deeper together so all will flourish. To help us with the planning for the program next year, we'd like to go through just a few short excerpts of 3 forums that we received really good feedback on this year, and we'll just watch a small portion of those, and then maybe that'll spark some interest in topics, and we'd like to have just a short discussion after that about what you'd like to hear for next year and ideas, people maybe you'd like to have us invite to come in, and So I'm going to be doing a little bit of double duty today here with monitoring the chat and with questions and comments. So anybody has something to contribute at any time, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. So with that, we'll get started. So today we will take a look at the excerpts, as I said, and then we'll also introduce what our theme is for the next program year coming up. Actually starts in the fall, and with Coming Together Sunday, and then have some discussions, like I mentioned, about what we do next. So the first excerpt we'd like to share this morning relates to trauma-informed care. And some of you may recall David Hottinger from Hennepin County Medical Center. And some of the questions that he addressed in his forum, we'll see some short excerpts from that. Also one on food security and building intentional communities and providing affordable housing. This is the Envision project, which was a special grant recipient from Westminster this year. And you'll see our questions here that we'd like you to be thinking about. What would you like to know more about? What issues? Any particular people you'd like to hear from, either from grant recipients of Westminster you're familiar with, or other organizations we could invite. So with that, we'll start with David Hottinger's Trauma-Informed Care forum, and here's just a short excerpt, and he's talking about what we've learned and what works best and how to approach people who have been traumatized in a more effective way.
So a couple of definitions here. One is traumatic stress, and again, this is kind of an individualistic, but don't think just about person, think about families, think about community, think about an organization, a church, a neighborhood. When you experience an event that's overwhelming, it's usually life-threatening, not always. It's terrifying or horrifying in the face of helplessness. So it's not the event itself that constitutes trauma, it's our response to it. So what can impact one person, you seem like they sort of went through something horrible and seemed just fine, could have a very different impact on somebody else. Toxic stress. That's associated with a prolonged and intense activation of the body's stress response to such an extent it can change the way a child's brain develops, the very architecture of the brain, with problematic long-term consequences. So talk about this in a minute. When children are exposed over and over again to abuse, to violence in the home, in the neighborhood, in the community, this can have long-term effects on our brains and on our bodies. This is an important concept, allostatic load, which is the wear and tear on the body and brain that can be a result of conditions such as poverty, racism, chronic hunger, lower socioeconomic status. And it's that cumulative effect that just overwhelms our ability to cope. And that's just one more definition of trauma that comes from the federal government. I like it, at least, that they put in here the lasting adverse effects to the functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being And so this can have an impact on all these different areas. I want to talk just about some of the spiritual care dimensions of this. I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So historically, our faith traditions or religions often would characterize sort of bad behavior as this is coming from a bad person. That person's evil, they're a sinner, they're possessed. Medicine came along, science came along. Well, let's characterize everybody as sick. This is all just because you have an illness. I think right now where we are, we're probably a combination of sick and bad in our systems of care. The trauma-informed movement asks us to look at things through the framework of injury. What's happened? So the question moves from what's wrong with you? What's wrong with that family? What's wrong with that coworker? What's wrong with that neighborhood that they're acting this way? Why is all that going on over there all the time? To what's happened? What's the deeper story? Which is a harder question to get at because sometimes we get answers that are really painful to hear. So just in closing, a couple, I think, of the unique contributions of spiritual care to trauma-informed care begins with our unique capacity in the faith community to help cultivate conditions of safety. So fundamental characteristic of trauma is people don't feel safe. They've had their sense of safety taken away. Reducing the effects of and healing from trauma involves restoring conditions in which safety can be experienced at the neurobiological level. So it does begin with our bodies. As human beings, but we're wired to connect with one another. We use the term to co-regulate one another. That's a term that's come out of trauma-informed care. That helps people we care about feel safe. Safety begins with physical safety, but it includes emotional, cultural, social, and spiritual safety. So as we think about this in terms of as people of faith, how do we do that with one another? How did we do that in our families and in our congregations, in our neighborhoods? This comes from Bonnie Badenoch, who writes a lot about trauma-informed care, and I love this quote. "We all need groups of support that are dedicated to just being present to one another. Whether it's 2 people getting together, or 2 or 3 are gathered, whether it's 10 people getting together, there's a sense in our bodies that we're really just here for one another. We can hold whatever it is that arises in that moment. We're meant to be interdependent through our entire lives." I was out noticing when I was preparing for this, your art exhibition, the art of belonging. And I was like, wow, we could just show the art out there today, that sense of, I felt very connected and safe and inspired as I walked around. And I loved, that whole, I think isn't Westminster's, what's your motto? To be a telling presence in the city. So I didn't really connect that till I saw it on, I was like, oh, embody presence. And so how do we do that as a church?
So another perspective that we got was on another key issue related to food insecurity. You may recall Theresa McCormick from Second Harvest Heartland came and spoke about some of the impacts, especially related to nutritional assistance in children. And here's a short summary of what she had to say.
So I was talking with Elaine right before we got started, and I would never say it was a silver lining of COVID, but I think an important learning. It's probably one of the largest demonstrations that we have had in our history as a country of the power of these social safety net programs. Because during the pandemic, early on, organizations like Second Harvest Heartland, food banks across the country, we really stepped into our advocacy power because we recognized we needed more than just supports for food distribution to be able to meet the increase of hunger that we were seeing. So for example, our food bank last year distributed 105 million meals, food that went out our door and into the community. But for every single meal that the food bank distributes, SNAP can provide 9. And we saw how vitally important it was to not only keep that program strong, but frankly expand that program, because any changes to the SNAP program is such a large loss of support in the community. It's more than what the food bank could step into to fill, or the charitable hunger relief system could step in to fill. And we saw some really important wins through the pandemic of expansions of federal nutrition programs that you can see on the slides here had an important impact on lifting people out of poverty. And so in many ways, while we are still rallying around that 1 in 10 Minnesotans, because we know we cannot look away from that experience of food insecurity right now, federal nutrition programs really plays an outsized role in preventing further hunger crisis in our country. And we've seen that these are really important for us to not only continue to invest in, but frankly continue to expand how folks are accessing these programs, because again, this is just impact from the last 18 months that we're seeing what a lift that these federal nutrition programs have. Things like expanding SNAP benefits. You might have heard about emergency SNAP. So extending SNAP benefits. There was a program within here that also was very specific for families with children called Pandemic EBT. We could get into the data for those who get excited about data, but really outsized impact on ensuring that families with young school-aged children had an increased benefit for the meals that those kids weren't getting when they were in school. It was a critical program. And we're seeing now from the last 18 months, Center for Budget Policy Priorities, Food Resource Action Council, so many other organizations that have been doing the research over the last 18 months are saying this program specifically, these extended benefits directly to families, lifted children out of worsening poverty. We also saw that things like just direct payments to families were really important in preventing further poverty, especially for families with children. So thinking about stimulus checks or unemployment benefits, getting money to families was really important to prevent further hunger crisis in the last 18 months.
And finally, one of the more popular social justice forums we had this past year, actually, talking about the small house movement and the Envision community that's going up in North Minneapolis on 21st and Penn. And but it's not just building affordable housing, it's also building community. And so here you have just a short clip of 3 of the presenters, all of which have lived experience with homelessness, and they were the ones that actually put together the design team. And I know one of the people that's in the room here actually had a chance to go out and see that. Let's take a listen to what these community leaders
Envision is a community, is a collaborative of 22 organizations working together to create new type of housing for Minneapolis so that all people, including people with very low income, have what they need to live their healthiest life. The Envision Community Collaborative include homeless advocate, housing provider, supportive service agency, health expert, education institution, faith community, and other group interested in making Envision a reality.
Building and diving deep so all can flourish is a great way of summing up Envision intentional communities. We are a BIPOC-led intentional community. We have all experienced homelessness. I was brought up in a neighborhood where if you missed your school bus, the neighbor would give you a ride to school. The neighbor, even if it was cold outside, you could wait on your neighbor's porch for the school bus. Our neighborhoods have changed. Time has changed, and now it's time to dive deep and to build our community to what it once was. Safe, nurturing, caring, building, and sharing, and growing. I remember growing up in South Minneapolis on 38th in Chicago, and my cousin/brother wanted to play hockey so bad, but my grandma didn't have the money to spend $200 on equipment. We all know hockey equipment is expensive. It still is. And our neighbor who used to go over there for lunch or dinner when we didn't have school, he bought my brother equipment to play hockey. This is a prime example of diving deep because of the neighbor's gift to my family. We're able now to help other kids in the neighborhood for generations to come. We are all living for a purpose. We just have to find what that purpose is. Building homes for the community is a really great start. Sherrie?
Envision is a mixture of international community and truly affordable housing. I am going to turn it over to Freddie from here.
Envision is more than just a roof over our head. That relationships are more important than the roof. That means we are working hard to create the condition necessary to live a cooperative and support each other. Shared value guide. I don't need this for this. Shared values. How do we look at shared values? Our interests. What we share with each other. Like say, for example, like trust. Trust is not given, it's earned. And sometimes you have to build that trust. It's because some of us has been on the streets so much where we've been rejected so much where we have that lack of trust in the system or anyone that's going to help us. So we build that trust, becoming good neighbors, building relationship, meeting people inside the community, newcomers, oldcomers. Thank you, Sherrie. We let go. We let go of things that we no longer need while we're living in the streets. Once we get into a place such as drug addiction, alcohol, we begin to let those things go, like bad behavior, because we're in a place now that where we feel more safe and more willing to open up to trust other people. We learn from each other. There's a lot of things that we pick up being homeless and that we learn from each other. See, a community within a homeless community. It just need a place to develop that community. And so we learn from each other by how to cook, how to clean, budgeting, how to be able to function while living in a housing unit. Where we need help at, we learn from each other. Social sharing responsibility. I think that's one of the biggest things because if you're my neighbor and you out there working the yard or shoveling the snow, I come out there and help you shovel the yard or shovel the snow or cut grass or plant whatever, help keep the common house clean. That's a shared responsibility. We take what you call integrity, but when we do that. So, social change from out of one environment and into another environment, that's what you call a change because we learn how to accept that social change and develop ourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually.
So you've seen a few of the excerpts of some of the highlights of this past year. Recently, our social justice team had a planning retreat, and we have developed the theme for the new year, which will start in September, investing in each other's future, which we think builds nicely on what we've been doing so far. And actually, the genesis of this idea came from one of our presenters this past season. Some of you may remember the youth development director from Tubman Center when she came, and in one of the questions that she got was about what we can do to better support youth. And her response was to be invested in each other's future. And so that was the seed from which this theme grew. So related to that, I'd like to open up some discussion, and I'll capture notes here, and then we've got somebody in the room monitoring the live stream chat. So for those of you that are online, you can have a chance to contribute as well. And if you have suggestions or ideas, raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic to you to capture those. And that. thank you, Elena, for taking notes. And then Joe will be monitoring the live stream chat, and she can speak up as items come in. So regarding our first question, what would you like to know more about? What are some of the issues that you think we need to be addressing in the Westminster community, in our Twin Cities community? Thoughts?
I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but recently as we've been driving around, we've run across a couple of businesses that don't have enough people working for them. At the same time, as we're driving around, we see people standing on the corner with signs asking for money. So my question has to do with how can we approach and work with and help to eliminate people who are quote unquote homeless as a group, and how we can also, as we begin to understand that, how we can sell that to our congregation, just not our wonderful little forum. Right. Okay, because we get lots of great information here, and it doesn't go out to the 3,000 people who are in our church. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Other thoughts? Here we go, George.
My question is, on people on the street corners, I've kind of made a decision myself personally to not hand out dollars to them. And do they know, I'm assuming they know, organizations in the city that help homeless people, Groveland Terrace and others. And I don't know if we supply people to help these organizations, or, and I don't want to go up to somebody I drive by and say, have you checked in with an organization? Can hardly do that, but so I don't know if we have people working with various organizations that are helping the homeless.
Actually, we do, and we have a lot of volunteers with community partners and grant recipients. So, but there's always more that can be done. And I know, for example, to your point, I'm familiar with a UCC community in South Minneapolis, and one of the things they're doing is they do a project each Sunday where they make little packages with information in them, but also things like, you know, granola bars and just other things that'll kind of help people get through the day. And they make an intentional commitment to go out and hand these out whenever they see people in need. So,
people that are working with those organizations that, or the one you mentioned, okay.
yeah. So that's one idea, and that's something we can expand on. So thank you very much. Other thoughts? How are we doing on the live stream here? No additional pieces? People are pondering? Okay. You know, one of the things that I'd just like to throw out is I was getting caught up in a little Presbyterian reading this week, and our General Assembly is coming up. And I was looking, well, what are they talking about at General Assembly? Racial equity, that's one issue. Does that resonate? I see some heads nodding yes. Another issue that's coming up that's going to be discussed at GA is gun violence. I've got some amens there. And another has got to do with ecumenical and interfaith relations, how we relate to people from other communities of faith beyond Christian traditions. And some of the other issues have to do with healthcare equity, huge issues I know we've had. Does that resonate with people? And I know that some of the other issues that are coming up with having to do with some of our global partners, and particularly what's going on in Cameroon. We, with the pandemic, have been a little bit challenged with some of the communications with global partners, but that may be another opportunity for us to take on. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, we have a couple of comments from the chat. Marilyn says that she believes we need to learn humility to address our own biases in order to enact true dialogue. So that was her comment. And Carol Ann asked a related question: what does investment mean for the social justice ministry team? So I think they're interested in knowing how the team is understanding that concept.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and we're going to be building out through the year. Certainly, there's investments in times of money and time, but also we're looking at how do we maybe turn that on its head and not just look at financial returns. You know, we've got the capital campaign coming up, and that's going to divert some attention on the financial stuff. But what can we do on a person-to-person and on a community basis to be more invested in the outcome of our neighbors? So that's kind of a capsule summary of what we're thinking about so far. Other things on the chat, Joe? Or okay, maybe we'll move on to our next question here and see what that sparks. And that is, many of us have been involved or know about some of Westminster's community partners or grant recipients. You mentioned Groveland Food Shelf as an example. That's just one example, but can anybody think of other partners or organizations in the that Westminster deals with, on maybe that you've had some exposure with, that you think would be helpful to get broader exposure in a forum?
My question would be is who are our recipients? Who are our recipients? Okay. And we need to know that, and the congregation needs to know that.
Well, we have somebody standing right here who can answer that.
I will just share that in the latest newsletter, there's a listing of them, and also throughout the year, watch for the news section of the Westminster website, because there will be a highlight on all 15 of the organizations that receive grants. But then we also have organizations that we've had relationships with. So are there some? And also, we are not shy about reaching out to organizations we don't have relationships with. So if there are nonprofit organizations in the Twin Cities that you know of that you would like for us to learn more about, share those names now.
You know, for example, we just heard from the Envision team. They're in the process of actually building the community on 21st and Penn in North Minneapolis with the small housing enclave. Some of you may remember that. That might be one organization we could come back for kind of a progress report and see what they're doing, what they've learned, and interests they may be attracting from others. I know we have the Hunger Ministry team has been particularly active, not only with Groveland Food Shelf that came up earlier, but also we heard from Second Harvest Heartland. That might be an organization that we might have come back. Joe?
On the chat, Doug Mitchell says he's interested in hearing more concerning Palestinian human rights with the Bethlehem Partnership. And he mentions Betty McCollum's bill, H.R. 2590, which would regulate how our huge financial investment in Israel is allocated so that it is not used to incarcerate children, demolish Palestinian homes, or engage in other harmful behaviors.
Excellent. And, you know, that kind of relates overall to the, to the investment theme, too, in terms of socially responsible investing. And maybe that's another area we've had some discussion with. I know the session has been looking at different ways of being more socially responsible in how we invest our funds.
And Carol Ann says she'd like to hear more about open arms.
Oh, great. Okay. Wonderful. Just Elena alluded to this just briefly in her comments, but there's no limit to the people that are in our community that are doing good things. So, any other thoughts?
Well, some of the issues are so tied to legislative needs. Is there any possibility that legislators could tell us, come in and say, this is how you access and change our votes or change other people's votes? Or it just seems like there's a disconnect sometimes between what we're trying to do and what's happening on the legislative end, both federal and state.
I think that's a really good point. And, we are a member of a group, some of you may be aware of this, called the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, that monitors a lot of the issues that we've been talking about, and I'm sure will come up in the next year, and some of the bills like what Doug Mitchell just mentioned, which may have sparked your comment in part. But regardless of that, there is a day on the Hill each year.
Just that one day and
right.
It's not enough.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, we need to have an ongoing dialogue, and that's a really good point, and that's an excellent example of investing in the future beyond just monetary pieces. Hang on just a minute.
So I'd like to hear more about an organization called MICA that helps people if they're homeless.
Okay, great. Yeah, Micah does a lot of good work. And that's a good example because it also brings together many faith communities from across the Twin Cities. So thank you for that.
Another comment from the chat from Rick Person. He mentioned the presentation last week from Adair Mosley, who is head of Pillsbury United Communities. And he recalled Adair saying that general operating support in whenever you're making contributions, individual contributions or Westminster contributions to nonprofits are always helpful because that enables them to be nimble and address current needs. But at the same time, contributions to long-term investments, such as the North Minneapolis community, are also critical. And he mentioned a real estate investment trust that Pillsbury United Community is developing. So I think he's interested maybe in hearing more about that specific investment-related initiative.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that I know Adair mentioned too is the projects that they have, like at the North Market. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's over on 44th and Humboldt, right by the new library, or relatively new library. And that's a great opportunity for to help support Pillsbury United's efforts.
And just a request from one of our online participants, when people are speaking, you need to speak right into the microphone so that our friends online can hear you and and maybe you can sometimes repeat the gist of comments or questions too, just so we have full dialogue across our various modes of participation.
Okay.
Another comment from Carol Ann. She says that with regard to changing weather patterns and the impact on farm and food and feeding for all of us, it would be timely to have a presentation from a community-supported agriculture organization.
That's a great idea. I know there's several community-supported agricultural initiatives around town, and many Westminster members I know belong to several of those. So, other thoughts or ideas? Okay. So just a couple reminders of upcoming pieces. And that is next Sunday, we will not be having a social justice forum because of the Memorial Day weekend. But we do have one last forum of the current program year, and that is on Sunday, June 5th. Many of you may recall Dr. Mitri Rahab from our partner, one of our partners in Bethlehem, Palestine, the Dar al-Khalima University, and he will be here on June 5th, and we'll be doing a presentation which will be sponsored jointly by Adult Education and the Social Justice team, and that will be in Westminster Hall. So look forward to that as a good way to wrap up the year. And also just another reminder that the social justice forums will begin again with our new theme at the Coming Together Sunday, and we're working on some high-level speakers to come and get the year off to a good start. So we'll keep you posted on that as well, and that will be on September 11th. So a little bit shorter forum this morning, but very good engagement and discussion, and thanks to everybody here in the room and online. Appreciate your help.